I think there were not many people who understood just how broad his interests were and how supportive he was of an astonishingly wide range of organisation.
The procession was supposed to be controlled down to the final footstep. Every position had been agreed, every movement rehearsed, every member of the family expected to know exactly where they belonged. Then Princess Anne stepped forward. Camilla stopped. King Charles turned sharply toward his sister, and in one unforgettable instant, the carefully arranged royal order collapsed into stunned silence. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles felt the shock before he could hide it. This final procession was meant to place the king at the emotional center of a solemn royal moment, with every relative positioned to show stability around him. In simple terms, a royal procession is the formal walking order used during major ceremonies, and where someone stands can signal closeness, rank, and trust. Camilla had been assigned the place immediately beside him, yet Anne moved into that space without hesitation, while the queen consort was quietly told to remain one pace behind. Camilla did not move at first. She looked toward Charles, waiting for him to correct what seemed impossible, but he was already staring at Anne. "What are you doing?" he asked under his breath. The princess barely turned. "What had to be done?" she replied. Her answer struck harder than any public argument, because it carried no panic and no apology. She had expected this moment. She had prepared for it. And now the king understood that challenging her there would turn a private dispute into a visible family rupture. Anne held her position as the procession began. Earlier, she had spoken privately with the senior household official responsible for ceremonial order, the internal arrangement that determines who stands where during major royal appearances. That conversation had produced a quiet authorization. She would take the place beside Charles after concerns were raised about who should symbolize continuity around him. This was not a sudden act of defiance. It had been approved before Camilla ever reached the line. Charles felt the deeper danger almost immediately. His sister had not simply stepped forward, and the palace structure had allowed his wife to be moved without his direct intervention. Camilla saw the same truth from behind them, and humiliation hardened into anger. Anne knew her brother would demand answers the moment the ceremony ended. The queen consort would demand them too. But before Charles could confront Anne, he would have to face something far more dangerous. All three had entered that procession, carrying very different ideas about loyalty, marriage, and what the crown now required in the difficult years ahead. The public saw three royals standing only feet apart. What they could not see were the years of emotion compressed into that tiny distance. Charles feared losing control of the family he had spent decades trying to stabilize. Camilla feared something even more personal being quietly pushed to the margins, and Anne feared that protecting her brother might require defying him. Charles carried both roles at once, and neither offered him an easy escape. As a husband, he understood exactly what the altered procession had done to Camilla. As king, he also understood the crown the institution built around the sovereign, and the continuity of the monarchy could not appear to bend every time private feelings collided with public duty. Anne knew that tension better than most. She had spent years treating service as something harder than affection, and she had never been afraid to tell her brother what others softened or avoided. Camilla entered the private sitting room with none of the calm she had shown moments earlier. She waited until the door closed before turning toward Charles. "Why didn't you stop her?" she asked. The king opened his mouth, then paused. That hesitation was enough. "You knew enough to let it happen," she said quietly. He denied planning her humiliation, but she was no longer listening only to his words. She was measuring the silence between them, wondering whether the man who had defended her for years had suddenly decided that defending her now carried too high a cost. Anne felt no triumph either. She removed her gloves slowly and sat alone before Charles found her. The princess looked composed, but he knew her too well to mistake composure for ease. "You embarrassed me," he said. She met his gaze and answered that embarrassment had never been her intention. She believed the original arrangement would have created a deeper problem, one that would have followed him long after the ceremony ended. Charles pressed her for details, but she refused to explain everything there. "Tonight," she told him, "no secretaries, no advisors, just us." Camilla soon discovered something that made the humiliation feel even colder. Several senior members of the household had known about the altered order before she did. The royal household, meaning the network of officials who organized the monarch's official duties and ceremonies had not been caught off guard. People around Charles had cooperated with Anne. That realization changed her anger into suspicion. Anne gave her brother only one final warning before leaving. This began weeks ago, and you know exactly when. Charles did know. The true beginning was not the procession at all, but one private meeting weeks earlier, when a single demand from Camilla crossed a line Anne believed could never be uncrossed. Weeks before Anne stepped into Camilla's place, the royal family gathered behind closed doors for what should have been a routine discussion about ceremonial responsibilities. It lasted less than an hour, yet one request changed the emotional balance of the household completely. Charles dismissed it as manageable. Camilla defended it as reasonable. Anne heard something entirely different, a warning. Camilla raised the proposal calmly. She wanted her household to help determine which family members would walk closest to Charles during major ceremonies, including the final procession. Her household, meaning the staff responsible for supporting her official duties and arrangements, would gain influence over ceremonial order. That order mattered because royal positioning did more than organize movement. It signaled proximity to the king, reflected rank, and shaped how the family appeared around him during important national moments. Anne did not hide her concern. She asked whether Camilla's staff could use that authority to move senior working royals behind people chosen by her own team. The queen consort answered that someone needed to create clarity around Charles and prevent confusion. The princess leaned forward and replied that clarity could not come from rewriting family relationships around the sovereign. Charles listened as the tension hardened. He knew both women were waiting for him to settle it. Charles closed the folder instead. "It will be reviewed," he said, hoping the sentence would stop the argument before it became personal. It did the opposite. Anne heard delay. Camilla heard opportunity. The king believed he had bought time, but his refusal to choose a side gave both women reason to believe the struggle was still alive. His silence had not cooled anything. It had simply pushed the conflict deeper into the palace. Anne received something troubling only days later. A draft procession plan reached her through the internal planning process, and Camilla appeared prominently beside Charles, while several senior royals had been pushed farther away. A ceremonial plan was simply the working document showing where each participant would stand and move, but this one carried enormous symbolic weight. The princess studied the page before asking one question: who approved this? The answer changed everything. Charles had not. Anne realized a proposal was already being treated as if the king had settled it. She folded the document, placed it away, and said she would speak to her brother personally. When Charles again tried to postpone the confrontation, her patience finally disappeared. Camilla had pushed for influence. He had avoided the decision. Now Anne believed only one boundary remained. By the morning of the ceremony, she was no longer trying to prevent conflict. She was preparing to force Charles and Camilla to confront it, where neither could quietly postpone it again. There were no raised voices at first. That made the confrontation more dangerous. Camilla stood opposite Anne with Charles between them, each woman certain that something fundamental had been taken from her. One believed her place beside her husband had been stolen. The other believed she had stopped the monarchy from surrendering something it would never recover. Then Camilla asked Anne to move. Camilla confronted her before aides could gather around them. The queen consort wanted the altered procession described publicly as nothing more than a ceremonial adjustment, a temporary change in who walked where during the formal royal appearance. That mattered, because ceremonial position carried meaning far beyond a few footsteps. If Anne's place beside Charles remained unexplained, many would see it as proof that his wife had lost influence at the very moment she expected to stand closest to him. Anne did not apologize. The princess told her plainly that the place had never belonged to any one person to control. Camilla stiffened. "I am his wife," she said. Anne answered without raising her voice. "And he is the king before he is anyone's husband." Charles flinched. Both statements cut directly into the conflict he had tried for weeks to avoid. One spoke for marriage, the other spoke for duty. He was trapped between them. Charles finally lost patience. He asked why neither woman had trusted him to make the decision himself. Anne reminded him that she had warned him before the ceremony and that he had delayed every difficult choice. Camilla immediately turned on that hesitation, saying his silence had allowed his sister to humiliate her in front of the entire royal household. The king placed his hand heavily on the table. "Enough," he said. "Stop speaking for me." Anne reached for the document she had kept since the earlier meeting. She placed the draft procession order in front of Charles and pointed to the amendments that had come through Camilla's household. He read them once, then again. His expression changed when he realized the revised positioning had circulated before he had formally approved it. The queen consort insisted she had wanted efficiency, not control. She had never ordered anyone to seize authority from the crown. Charles now saw the full damage. Camilla had pushed too far, Anne had acted because he would not, and his own delay had allowed suspicion to become open conflict. He refused to restore the original arrangement immediately. Instead, the king announced that every ceremonial decision surrounding his appearances would now face a formal review. Camilla understood what that meant. Anne's intervention might not be temporary at all. The argument had reached the king's desk, but the final decision would depend on a quieter network of authority that neither marriage nor family loyalty could simply override. Camilla believed Charles could restore everything with one sentence. Anne knew it was no longer that simple. Once the disputed procession order entered the machinery of the royal household, personal wishes collided with precedent, advisors, and the brutal need to protect the sovereign from appearing controlled by any private faction. At the center of it all sat one exhausted man forced to decide whom he trusted. Charles dismissed the room that evening and kept the ceremonial planning file in front of him. The king read the same pages again and again, returning to the amendments that had triggered Anne's objection. Ceremonial planning, in simple terms, was the internal process used to decide where royal family members stood and moved during major official appearances. Those positions carried weight because they could suggest status, access, and influence. Allowing one private household to shape them freely could make the monarch look managed rather than supported. Charles felt the weight of his own mistake as the minutes passed. He had tried to preserve peace by delaying the decision, but the delay had created something far worse. The unsigned approval page sat directly in front of him. He removed his glasses, set them beside the file, and stared at it. Camilla had believed the proposal still had a future. Anne had believed silence meant danger. He had given both women room to act because he had refused to choose. Anne waited elsewhere without any sense of victory. The princess knew Charles was reviewing everything, but that knowledge brought no relief. She had challenged Camilla because she believed the boundary around the crown mattered, yet hurting her brother had never been the goal. If he now saw her as someone who had cornered him in public, then even a successful intervention would carry a painful cost. Charles found something inside the file that changed the tone completely. A short written warning from Anne had been submitted days before the procession, asking him to settle the question privately before it reached the ceremony. The king read it twice. She had not begun with defiance. She had tried restraint first. Charles finally made the decision he had avoided for too long. No individual household would be allowed to alter ceremonial positioning around him without central approval. Camilla's team would not control the order. Anne's place in the procession would stand. The ruling was clear. The emotional damage was not. Charles decided no secretary would deliver it, and no careful palace phrase would soften the truth. When he entered Camilla's room carrying the decision himself, the institutional battle was over. The marriage was about to absorb the cost. Camilla did not shout when Charles told her. That silence unsettled him more than anger would have. She listened as her husband explained that the procession would not be corrected, that Anne's position would stand, and that future ceremonial arrangements would remain outside the control of individual households. Then she asked the question he had been dreading. "Did you choose her over me?" Charles answered carefully, but the queen consort was already hearing something deeper than procedure. He explained that control over future procession planning would now remain centralized, meaning no single royal household could decide who stood or walked closest to the sovereign during major ceremonies. The rule mattered because royal precedence, the formal order showing rank and position within official events, shaped how authority was understood. Camilla would still stand beside him when appropriate, but her team would no longer influence the wider arrangement around him. Camilla lowered her voice instead of raising it. She told Charles that the public would not remember the technical explanation. They would remember Anne stepping forward while she was moved backward. They would remember the king looking surprised and his wife being left behind. For her, the wound was not constitutional. It was personal. After years of defending her place beside him, one procession had made that place suddenly look uncertain. Charles felt the accusation because he knew part of it was deserved. He admitted that he should have confronted the disputed proposal the moment it appeared. The king had believed delay would calm everyone. Instead, it allowed resentment to grow until Anne acted, and Camilla paid the public price. She looked at him and said quietly, "Your delay became my humiliation." He had no easy answer, because, this time, she was right. Camilla asked one final question. Would Anne remain beside him during the last ceremonial stage still to come? Charles hesitated, then confirmed that his sister would keep the position already assigned. The queen consort turned away and stayed silent for several long seconds. Then she said perhaps she should withdraw entirely. Charles immediately refused. He told her leaving would turn a private dispute into an unmistakable family fracture. Absence would speak louder than any headline. He needed her there, not because the ruling had changed, but because disappearing would make reconciliation almost impossible. Camilla finally agreed. She would attend. She would not challenge Anne publicly. But she wanted something first. Before the final procession began, she wanted one private conversation with the woman who had displaced her. The institutional battle was over. Now the monarchy's emotional survival depended on what Camilla and Anne said when Charles was no longer standing between them. For the first time since the crisis began, there were no advisors, no ceremonial charts, and no king standing between them. Anne and Camilla faced each other privately before the final stage of the procession. One had won the argument. The other had carried the humiliation. Yet when Camilla finally spoke, she did not ask for her place back. She asked something far more personal. Camilla looked directly at Anne and asked whether any of this had truly been about protecting Charles, or whether the princess had simply never believed she belonged beside him. The question stripped away every official explanation. Anne did not answer quickly. She knew the difference between affection and duty, and she told the queen consort that her objection had never been to a wife standing beside her husband. It had been to any private household gaining the power to decide who else could be pushed away from the sovereign. Camilla finally admitted why the position had mattered so much. After years of public judgment, ceremony had become more than ceremony to her. Standing beside Charles felt like proof that she could no longer be removed from his life or treated as temporary. Being moved backward had reopened fears she thought were buried. Anne listened without interrupting. For the first time, she heard not ambition, but insecurity. Anne answered with a confession of her own. She had watched Charles carry more responsibility, more pressure, and more expectation than ever before. The princess feared that people around him could begin protecting their own influence, while convincing themselves they were protecting the king. That was why the procession order had frightened her. It was not one step forward or backward. It was the possibility that private loyalty could slowly begin shaping public authority. Camilla lowered her guard. She admitted that her household should never have circulated changes before Charles had approved them. The queen consort said the proposal had gone too far, even if control had never been her intention. It was the first clear concession she had made since the confrontation began, and Anne did not use it as a victory. Anne told her she had no intention of turning the final procession into a public defeat. She would stand where Charles had decided, but Camilla would be treated openly and unmistakably as his wife. No humiliation, no theatrical triumph, no attempt to erase her. Camilla accepted that. When the moment came to leave, the two women walked out together until ceremony required their paths to separate. Their private truce had changed everything between them, but the public knew none of it. And once Britain saw Anne beside the king again, the outside world began writing a very different story. By evening, one image had overwhelmed every explanation the palace might offer. Charles moving forward with Anne beside him, while Camilla walked just behind. To some, it looked like rejection. To others, duty. To millions who knew nothing about the private conversation beforehand, the small distance between three people became a national argument about marriage, loyalty, hierarchy, and the future of the crown. Charles watched the coverage with growing unease. Broadcasters replayed the moment Anne stepped into position beside him, slowing down his brief sideways glance and Camilla's restrained expression behind them. The royal household soon issued a short statement, saying the ceremonial positioning had followed established planning. In simple terms, That meant the walking order had been arranged through official palace procedure, rather than decided in the moment. The explanation mattered, because even a few steps could be interpreted as a message about status, trust, and influence. Anne remained beside her brother after the ceremony, as television panels argued over what the image meant. The princess listened, while commentators asked whether she had displaced Camilla or simply carried out a legitimate ceremonial role. Charles finally turned to her and said what neither of them could ignore. Their private disagreement had become national symbolism. Anne did not celebrate. She knew every word she said now could deepen the divide rather than close it. Camilla encountered an even harsher version of the story. A newspaper front page carried the photograph beneath the headline, "Sister at the King's Side." The Queen Consort read the words once, then folded the paper shut. She understood instantly how easily humiliation could become a public narrative. What she and Anne had settled privately was now being judged by people who had never heard their conversation. Outside Buckingham Palace, the argument took on a different tone. A crowd gathered near the gates as people watched clips of the procession on their phones. Some defended Anne, others sympathized with Camilla, but a quieter interpretation began to spread. The monarchy could survive only if those closest to power accepted limits as firmly as they accepted privilege. The moment stopped looking like a simple victory and began to look like a warning. Anne refused to exploit that shift. When asked privately whether she felt vindicated, she answered only that the ceremony had belonged to Charles. Her restraint slowly changed the story. Charles saw it happening. He also saw both women carrying the cost. That evening, the king summoned Anne and Camilla for one final conversation. The world had already issued its judgment through photographs and headlines. Now Charles intended to make sure the final word belonged to the family itself. In the end, nobody overturned the judgment. Nobody rewrote Elizabeth's fictional trust. Laura received no legal standing. Anne withdrew none of her objections, and Charles refused to use his position to blur a boundary his mother had deliberately left behind. Yet something inside the family changed anyway. What began as a fight over access ended with a harder truth, accepted by everyone involved. Belonging could not always be measured by what a person inherited. Laura made the first final choice. She formally refused to appeal, meaning she would not ask a higher court to review the fictional high court ruling. That decision made the legal outcome definitive. She had no enforceable standing inside Elizabeth's personal trust, and she no longer wanted to spend months fighting a structure that had already drawn its line. Charles followed with a decision of his own. The king confirmed that he would not ask the trustees to restructure the arrangement or create a path around his mother's wishes. Anne accepted that immediately. The princess understood the choice as proof that Elizabeth's intentions would be preserved without further pressure from inside the family. Camilla found the emotional part harder. She admitted to Laura that the legal rejection had felt personal, because watching her daughter excluded from the trust felt like watching her excluded from the family itself. Laura answered quietly that she no longer saw those things as the same. She had lost the claim, but she had stopped allowing the claim to define whether she belonged. Anne offered no celebration. In a private conversation with Camilla, the princess said protecting Elizabeth's wishes had never been meant to humiliate Laura. The queen accepted that explanation without pretending the experience had not hurt. The bitterness did not disappear instantly, but the argument finally lost its power. Charles then made one final promise. Any future personal family arrangements under his own control would be written with absolute clarity, so affection, expectation, and legal rights could never become confused in the same way again. The king later brought Camilla and Anne together one final time. No legal papers stood between them. Laura had already confirmed the case was over. Charles looked at both women and said his mother's wishes would stand, and so would the family. Camilla did not argue. Anne did not answer with triumph. For once, silence did not signal another battle. It signaled the end of one. Laura had lost the legal argument but regained control of its meaning. Anne had protected her mother's wishes. Charles had discovered the limits of royal power, and Camilla had learned that family acceptance and inheritance were not the same thing. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.